everyone's way. And over to you, Dean.
Okay, thank you. So you're all very, very welcome. This webinar series that we've put together is in recognition of the 50th anniversary of the UNESCO Man in Biosphere programme. And I want to say a massive thank you to Eleanor and Joe, my fellow Biosphere coordinators there, for their efforts in bringing this together. There are other thank yous. I'm going to get on with it in a bit. But Eleanor, you're next on my screen, so I'm going to hand you want to tell us a little bit about your biosphere before I crack on?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Dean. So my name's Eleanor Turner, and I am the biosphere officer working down in the Kerry Biosphere Reserve down in Southwest Ireland, for anyone who's not familiar with the geography of Ireland. We are actually a landlocked biosphere, which is quite interesting considering Kerry has one of the longest coastlines in all of Ireland. But we have such amazing habitats and species here. The core area of our biosphere reserve is Clarny National Park, which has Ireland's only native red deer herd and a myriad of other species, and oak woodlands and really beautiful features. We also have Ireland's largest mountain, Carrauntoohil, right in the centre of our biosphere reserve too, so really significant places. And I suppose the people here in Kerry, I'm from Kerry, so I'm a bit biased anyways, but it's always very warm, really community-driven work. So I'm absolutely delighted to be in the position and working with the Biosphere Reserve down here, and also delighted to be working with Dean and Joe in the world network of Biosphere Reserves and able to deliver webinar series like this with them.
Thank you, Eleanor. So Joe, will you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Isle of Man?
Yeah, hi, Fastamai in Manx Gaelic, everybody. It's great to see so many people from the Isle of Man on the webinar today, actually, and also to meet so many new people from Dublin Bay, where I had the pleasure of spending a bit of time in 2019 for Euromab, and also Kerry. So hello to you all. I think for us, one of the great joys of being a biosphere is that ability that we have to collaborate with each other and learn from each other. And we're obviously close neighbours, we're obviously proud Celtic nations together, and we have a lot in common, I think. But we also have a lot that sort of separates us, and a lot of strands of work that we're doing individually. And I think for our biosphere, we've been a UNESCO Biosphere since 2016. We are very much looking forward to working with you in the year ahead to share some of our stories and to find out a little bit more about some of our closest neighbour biospheres. So thank you very much for inviting us onto this webinar series, and we look forward to delivering our own webinars as the year goes on. And we can't wait to find out a little bit more about your iconic Brent geese and your other bird life. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Thanks very much. There's another thank you I want to put out there, and that's to the NPWS, National Parks and Wildlife Service. They've kindly supported this collaboration. They've secured the license for the Zoom license for these webinars. So that's very, very grateful. So I appreciate them doing that, and obviously BirdWatch Ireland, who have put in a huge amount of effort pulling all this information together. And we have Tara, who I'm going to be handing over to in a bit, and we've also Ricky, who's out in the field, so we're actually going to see some of Dublin Bay firsthand, which is quite amazing and a little bit scary, I have to admit, but fingers crossed everything will work. So I'm just going to crack on. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Dublin Bay Biosphere and the UNESCO programme. So now, there we go. So there's a great image of the Dublin Bay Biosphere. You've got the River Liffey flowing through Dublin City. So obviously Dublin City is the capital of Ireland, and the Liffey flows out into Dublin Bay. We're not unique, but we're quite rare in the fact that we have a capital city at the centre of our biosphere. To the top left-hand corner there, you've got Howth Head, and just in front of Howth Head, you've got North Bull Island. And over to the right-hand side, you have Dunleary. You can just about see the harbour there, and behind that, you have Dorky Island. And that encompasses the majority of the biosphere. We have 330,000 people living within the Dublin Bay Biosphere in our transition zone. So, you know, it's great that we're able to engage and work with them. So just a couple of images, particularly for those who are not from Dublin, and obviously quite a few of you are. We've got a great image there of Collymore Harbour on the top left-hand side, looking out to Dorky with the Martello Tower on the island. On the top right-hand side, you have Howth, harbour, great little image there of some of the fishing boats and the sailing boats. On the bottom left you have Dunleary Harbour and Bandstand, and on the bottom right you have another image there of North Bell Island. So, you know, what is a biosphere? I mean, biospheres are internationally recognised for their biodiversity. They're important sites for nature conservation. It's a designation by UNESCO, and it was launched in 1971. The programme was first mooted in 1970, but it was officially launched in November 1971. And there are currently 714 biospheres in 129 states. So we're part of a really big, fantastic network where we can learn and share ideas with each other. So the UNESCO Biosphere goes, the primary goal is conservation. We have to have something obviously worth protecting. But also biospheres are about sustainable development. So we're supporting the local economy, people who work within the biosphere. That's primarily adventure tourism providers, but not wholly. And then there's the learning and learning element. So we need to understand what's happening in our biosphere so that we can manage them properly, but we also need to share that knowledge, and that's part of what this presentation today is all about. So a little bit about the Dublin Bay Biosphere vision. I'll read it to you there. It's to celebrate and promote a wider appreciation of the natural and cultural heritage of Dublin Bay, to capture the inherent passion of the community for the biosphere concept, and for the Dublin Bay Biosphere to be an exemplar of a new wave of biospheres in the World Network. And we're certainly hoping that we'll have some more Irish biospheres in the near future. A second part of the vision is Dublin Bay Biosphere will be recognised and valued as a place where people, nature and culture connect, and where residents, visitors and businesses directly contribute to the conservation of their natural, cultural and built heritage through everyday actions. The Biosphere will support a strong local economy based on ecotourism and responsible recreation, where statutory NGO business, community and environmental stakeholders work in partnership for a sustainable future. The whole purpose of this is people and nature connecting, and that can bring its own challenges, and I think that's something that will be covered during the next presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to hand you over to Tara. So Tara, it's all yours.
Thanks, William. Sorry, just give me 2 seconds. Just can't. Okay, hi, can everybody hear me okay? Or, yeah. Okay, so my name is Tara Adcock. I work for BirdWatch Ireland, and part of my role with BirdWatch Ireland is working on the Dublin Bay Birds project team. So I work with Ricky Whelan, who's just here on the left, and Helen Boland, who's the project manager. You'll be meeting Ricky Whelan a little bit later on in the show. So the Dublin Bay Birds project is lucky enough to be funded by Dublin Port Company, and we're very grateful to be given this opportunity today to talk about the Dublin Bay Biosphere and core Dublin Bay area. Okay, so what I'll be talking about is the Dublin Bay Biosphere, an overview of the main species at 3 sites in the Dublin Bay Biosphere. So these are Baldoyle Estuary, Ireland's Eye and the Dalkey Islands, like Dean has just mentioned. I'll be talking a little bit about what makes Dublin Bay unique, and I'll give an overview of the waterbird species in Dublin Bay and some of the pressures that are on the Dublin Bay ecosystem. Okay, so there are 6 key sites in the Dublin Bay Biosphere that are really important in terms of the wildlife that they contain, but they're also really important sites for people to get involved with wildlife and to get a really good grasp of what wildlife is present in the bay. So these are Baldoyle Estuary, just up here at the northern end. It's about 11 kilometres from Dublin city centre, so it just shows how central everything is in Dublin Bay. Sorry. We have Ireland's Eye, which is just an island just up here, and it has a really important seabird colony. And we have Dalkey Island just down to the south here, just at the southern tip of the bay. And then here in kind of what we'd call the core Dublin Bay area, we have North Bull Island, Talca Estuary, and the South Dublin Bay. Okay, so the Baldoyle Estuary the Baldoyle Estuary is a really important estuary just in the northern part of the bay, of the biosphere. It supports 1% or more of the world's population of light-bellied Brent geese, which means that it's internationally important site for this species. The reason that the light-bellied branchies are in Baldoyle Estuary is all because of this plant here. It's called eelgrass, and it's their preferred prey species. It's their preferred species to their preferred plant to eat. Sorry. When this runs out, as it does over the winter, they'll then move on to playing pitches. So, for instance, you can see Portmarnock Golf Course here. This will be full of brent geese, and there's other green spaces in the bay as well. Baldoyle Estuary is also important for 5 other species, so nationally important levels of these species occur here. So this means that 1% or more of Ireland's population of these species actually occur in Baldoyle Estuary during the winter months. So these species are shelduck, bar-tailed godwit, grey plover, golden plover and ringed plover. And ringed plover are arguably the cutest of the wading birds in Dublin Bay. Moving over to Ireland's Eye, this is a really important seabird colony. So the largest of the seabirds on Ireland's Eye is the gannet, and it has a wingspan of 2 meters, making it the largest seabird on the island. This bird is incredibly amazing. It's really well designed for its plunge diving technique that it uses. So basically it has like a built-in crash helmet in its head, because the bones in the skull are so thick that when it dives into the water at 100 kilometers per hour, it actually protects it and makes sure that it doesn't break its head. It also has air sacs in its throat, which allows it to protect its neck as well. It can also see fish from a height of 40 meters above the water. The next species on the slide is the black-legged kittiwake. This is the smallest of the gulls, and it's the only gull that's truly pelagic, i.e. it lives out at sea for its outside of the breeding season. So it's completely at sea during outside the breeding season. The third species we have is the fulmar. Fulmars arrived into Ireland in about 1911, and it's thought that they came here following ships from Wales. The way that fulmar hunts is really interesting because it can smell its prey, so it can smell plankton, it can smell other species, and it just follows its nose along. The third species we have is the razorbill. So razorbills, common guillemots and puffins are all part of the auk family. Razorbills and common guillemots have a really interesting parental strategy. So the fathers actually take off with the young after a couple of weeks once the chicks have left the nesting colony, and they will go out to sea with them, and they'll go out to sea with them and teach them how to fish while the mother gets to take it easy, so she just leaves completely. Puffins, on the other hand, have a bit more of a tough love approach. So after a few weeks to a couple of months, they just abandon the young in the burrow, and the young have to make their own way out to sea and learn how to do everything on their own. The final species that we have are the shag and the cormorant. So these two species look remarkably similar, but there are some key differences. So first off, the shag is a lot smaller. It has a glossier appearance overall, particularly during the breeding season. And during the breeding season, it has this crest here, and it also has this yellow gape. In comparison, we have the cormorant, which is a bit duller overall. It has a white gape around the mouth, and it's a lot bigger as well. So those are the species of Ireland's Eye. Sorry, this is so frozen on me. There we go. This is just a video of a shag swimming in the water. You can see just how comfortable and fish-like they are in the water. Okay, so down in the southern portion of the Dublin Bay Biosphere is Dalkey Island. So Dalkey Island is home to a really important tern colony. It's mainly made up of Arctic terns, which are this species here, but there are a few common terns on the colony as well. And up until 2016, we had small numbers of roseate terns. There's only one pair in 2016, but since then, they actually haven't been breeding on the island. And BirdWatch Ireland, in partnership with Dún Laoghaire County Council and in the past the EU Life project, has been working really hard to try and get the roseate tern to come back to the island. I'll be talking a little bit more about terns later on, and I'll go into the IDing of them then. Okay, so in Dublin, when we're talking about Dublin Bay, what we're typically talking about isn't the biosphere as a whole, but this core area here. So seeing from Sutton at the north down to Dunleary down here at the south. So when I'm talking about Dublin Bay from now on, I won't be talking about the biosphere as a whole, I'll be talking about this core area. So the species that I'll be talking about will be occurring in this area here. They do occur in Baldoyle Estuary as well, but I'll be talking specifically about the ones that are in this area. So Dublin Bay, as we're referring to it now, is composed of 3 core areas. This is North Bull Island up here to the north. This is the Talca Estuary and South Dublin Bay. But what makes this portion of Dublin Bay so special? First off, it's a wetland ecosystem. So a wetland is an area that is covered by shallow water either all or some of the time. And it's really important for water birds. These are birds which wade or swim in water and are dependent upon water for their survival, i.e. for food. Globally, we're losing wetlands 3 times faster than forests, which makes Dublin Bay all the more important to protect. And it makes it all the more special, both on a national and also on a global scale. It's one of the top 5 water bird sites in Ireland. So consistently, Dublin Bay is turning up as one of the top 5 waterbird sites in Ireland. And the reason for this is because of the huge amounts of birds that we get in the bay over the winter. The average is about 29,000 per year. Because of the huge numbers of birds that actually overwinter in Dublin Bay is now designated as an EU Special Protection Area for birds. The importance of this is that it means that Ireland has a legal obligation to protect this site, which is really important. The location of Dublin Bay also makes it quite unique. There are several estuaries close by, for example, Baldoyle and Rogerstown estuaries. We've already come across Baldoyle estuary. Also, its setting is quite unique. It has 1.5 million people on its doorstep. The Dublin Bay Biosphere as a whole is the only biosphere in Europe that's set within a capital city, which is quite phenomenal. It also has a large port at its core. Later on in the presentation, we're going to talk a little bit about the pressures that come with having a port and a really large urban population bang straight in the middle of all of this wildlife. But for now, we're just going to move on to other parts that make it special. So Dublin Bay is an important breeding area for terns during the summer months. These birds are actually breeding here. They're breeding on man-made structures in the port. And finally, there's a mosaic of habitats in the bay. And this is really important for having a good diversity of species. So for instance, we have the mudflats just here, so of North Bull Island, and also down in Booterstown Marsh and the Talca Estuary. These are basically just giant fridges. They're just areas where there's lots of food for birds to feed, and there's a lot of species which depend upon these. We also have the sand flats here of Dollymount Strand and also Sandymount Strand. The importance of having this diversity is best seen when we look at 2 species. So there's 2 species that are closely related that I'll give some details on later. But one of them uses the sand flats just here, and its cousin uses the mud flats. There's also salt marsh just in North Bull Island, just here, and in Booterstown Strand, Booterstown Marsh, which is just down here. This is really important for birds that are roosting up. Roosting just simply means resting. These areas provide a safe place for them to rest and regain energy lost when they're commuting or foraging, and it's really important that we don't disturb them at these sites. Finally, we have playing pitches. Dublin is quite unique in that there's a lot of green space in it, and these playing pitches are really important for species like brent geese, which rely on them when the eelgrass runs out. And we have man-made habitats, such as in the port, and these are really important for breeding birds. But now I'm going to hand you over to Ricky Whelan, who is standing somewhere around where this red dot is, and he's going to give you an overview of the bay. Okay, over to you, Ricky.
Hello, everyone. I don't know if you can see me. Can everyone see me, Tara? I can only see myself there.
Yeah, I can see you.
Okay, good. Well, so yeah, I'm Ricky. I'm on Bull Island, as Tara said. So, I'm stood on the point where Tara showed you on the map, which is just at the tip of the wooden bridge, is the access to to Bull Island. It's quite an interesting place. I started working with the Dublin Bay Birds project in January 2014, and this is where I parked the first day to start my fieldwork. So it's a place I'm very familiar with. Just to show you, I'm just going to change the direction on my screen to just show you what I'm looking at, to give you some context. Now, so the tide is still very high, so there's no birds about. There's a few turnstones just down here, lovely little birds, and so called because they basically turn stones and any debris they can find to find little creatures and crustaceans and things to eat. So I don't know if you can see them down there, but really this is fairly typical. You can see Clontarf down this way, that's the wooden bridge, and you can see what's as the tide drops, the mud flats and the sand emerging, and in the distance there to the right hand side, that paler colour habitat, that's the salt marsh, a really important habitat too. And to the right of that, you've got the sand dune system, which there's actually a golf course built there, so it's quite interesting. There's 2 golf courses on Bull Island. It's part of it. So Bull Island actually formed in after the I'm just flipping around there. Bull Island formed after the river walls were built in the 1700s to stop sand and silt building back up in the Port Channel. And what happened after that was, as the sand and silt was dumped out further out in the Irish Sea, it was coming back in with tidal action, and it was beginning to form and deposit and collect behind the north wall, and it developed into an embryonic dune system. The sand built up, and now you have an island which is 5 miles long or 5 kilometers long and nearly a kilometer wide at its widest point. So it's quite a significant piece of ground. And why the birds are here and why they like it so much is you've got everything they need, really. You've got the protection from the sea in the worst of the storms. The island actually gives that physical barrier, and also you've got some brilliant habitats full of food, like all the invertebrates, the crustaceans, the worms, all the things that water birds and waders, swans, geese, herons, ducks, you name it, like. So it's quite a good place to be. And then because we're in the middle of a capital city, it affords them even further protection because there's no guys out with shotguns and rifles hunting them, thankfully. So it's the birds really have all their bases covered here. So on an average day, 25-30 species of water bird could be easily recorded in this lagoon in front of me, and just a few brent geese flying across there. I don't know if you can see those. Very hard to give you meaningful views with the phone, but in the distance you've got some gulls roosting, and hopefully later on, potentially towards the end of the presentation, I might ask Dean to see if he can come back to me. I'll sit tight here, and if the tide is dropped, might be able to show you some waders and things closer up. So I'm just going to turn around and just show you context how close we are to the city and just how busy it is here. So if you can see in the distance there, in the cranes are in distance. Sorry, I'll straighten this up. In the very distance there, you can see a pile of cranes. And that's the middle of the city centre. So that's only a few miles from here. What we're looking straight into there is the Tulka estuary, where the River Tulka comes out from town, and it meets the Liffey just here to the left. So you can see those towers, they're Pigeon Coolbeg Towers. It's an old disused power plant. And right there where the smoke or the vapour is coming out of those chimneys is the middle of Dublin Port. So we're dead centre in the middle of or Dublin Port is dead centre in the middle of some really, really brilliant habitats and some really busy areas for birds. So as Tara mentioned, on average 30,000 water birds using the bay in the winter. So there's a lot going on here. I don't know if you can see those kayakers as well. So there's a range of uses. You can see how busy it is here with walkers today. So there is a level of disturbance the birds have adapted to too. So Tara's going to hit on that a bit more later, but for now I just wanted to give you the context, show you the sights, and maybe later show you a few more birds. We'll see if that'll work or not. So I'm going to go back to Tara now.
Hi, sorry, my screen has just stopped working again. There you go.
I'll leave my screen up till you get sorted.
Thanks a million. Seamless. Okay, there we go.
Just have it. I don't know if you can see in the distance. I'll keep talking till you get sorted, Tara.
Thanks.
Got some mute swans over there, which everyone will be familiar with, sort of our biggest water bird. And also feeding in front of them, you won't see them because they're so tiny. It's our smallest water bird, the little grebe, which dive in. They're very hard to sometimes locate because just as you're about to put your binoculars on them or get your eyes on them, they dive down looking for small fish and crustaceans and things. So it's good to see the biggest and the smallest water birds here today. I'm really hopeful now we'll have more birds later on, and it's good. So
Thanks, Ricky. I'm back in again. So.
All right, excellent.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Lillian. So some of the habitats, I'll just give a quick recap. Some of the habitats that Ricky could see there. This is the salt marsh that Ricky was talking about on North Bull Island. So this is the South Lagoon of North Bull Island. This is the Polka estuary. So this is really important at low tide as the tide comes out. As you can see there, as Ricky was saying, tide is still in a little bit. So those areas look quite devoid of birds, apart from the turnstone. But at low tide, there's just thousands of birds out on these mud flats here. We're gonna some of the birds that Ricky will see when the tide comes out are these species here. So these are these are species that there's internationally important numbers of in Dublin Bay. So this means that in some or all years, 1% or more of the world's populations of these species are present in Dublin Bay. So the 4 species are red knot, this bird here, light-bellied brent goose, who we've already met, bar-tailed godwit, and black-tailed godwit. So the red knot looks completely different during the breeding season compared to during the non-breeding season when we see it here in Ireland. During the breeding season, it has this beautiful red brick plumage, and both male and female have this plumage, which is quite unusual. The red knot also gets its name from the colour during the breeding season. So the red knot breeds in Greenland and northern Canada. Pre-migration, it essentially self-cannibalizes. So it reduces down the size of its digestive organs to make space for its flight muscles and its heart that'll power it the whole way up to Greenland, up to the Arctic region. Large numbers arrive in Dublin Bay in November, and most have left by April. So by April, you'll start to see them a little bit of red brick on them. So you get just a glimpse of what they look like during the breeding season. Now they're found in both North and South Dublin Bay. But if you're really, really desperate to see red knot, the place I'd recommend is basically where Ricky is standing now. It's in Dublin, it's in the North Bull Island, in the South Lagoon there. If you just hop onto that wooden bridge and take a look out, as the tide is falling, you'll see them coming out onto those mud flats and feeding. And it's really quite spectacular. You actually get thousands of these birds there. They gather in really tightly packed flocks, often thousands, during the winter, and this is just a strategy to keep warm. So just have a think to yourselves, how many birds do you think would be within this red dot, within this red circle? I'll just give you a minute just to have a quick think about it. Okay, so if we zoom in on that red dot, you can actually see that every bird with a red dot on its head is what we're looking at. That's 100 birds. So that 100 birds is packed in that little spot there, and it just shows just how densely packed in these species are, and just what a good method it is for keeping warm. It's also an absolute nightmare for counting, but that's aside from anything else. Okay, so coming on to the light-bellied brent goose. So this is definitely Ireland's favourite goose. They're an absolutely amazing species, and they breed up in the northeastern Canadian Arctic, and they stop off in Iceland to feed. So this is a ring recovery. So basically, put these rings onto their legs, and they're uniquely inscribed. And somebody read it down here on the east coast of Ireland, and then it was recited up here in the northeastern Canada. And it's just a really good way for us to understand what areas are important for these birds. Approximately 95% of the world's population of light-bellied frankies overwinter in Ireland, which places a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to protect this really charismatic species. The light-bellied frankies, as we've already mentioned, feeds on eelgrass, and when this runs out, they move on to playing pitches. So those green spaces in Dublin Bay, in Dublin, are really important for this species. In Dublin Bay, through counts that the Dublin Bay Birds Project has carried out, we found that the majority of these birds can actually be found at North Bull Island in Dublin Bay North. And the reason that they can be found there is because of the presence of eelgrass. There's just a lot more eelgrass in Dublin, in North Bull Island, than there would be in, say, for instance, the Talca Estuary or on Sandymount Strand. So that's why they're present there in such high concentrations. These birds actually really defy expectations. You would think that a species that breeds the whole way up here, where there's absolutely no people, would be really shy of people, that they'd keep their distance. But no, they kind of just get on with it. They've habituated to our presence. So this is a really nice photograph of Brent geese in Dublin Port, just feeding on the grain that's fallen from the silos that are coming in on the ships. And there's just absolutely no bother on them whatsoever. And another species that occurs in Dublin Bay in internationally important numbers is the bar-tailed godwit. Again, very much like the knot, it looks completely different when it's in its breeding plumage than it does when it's here with us in Ireland during the winter. If you go out in July though, when these birds are coming in from the Norwegian Arctic Circle, you will actually see them kind of still with a lot of the vestiges, or sometimes fully clad in this really red brick, beautiful plumage, and it's well worth a visit. So basically, from the colour ringer settings that I mentioned earlier, so this is a colouring here, and that's the inscription, it's DH. From these colouring, from people just seeing these colourings, we actually know that a lot of the Dublin Bay bar-tailed godwit stop over at the Wadden Sea in the Netherlands. This is an incredible spot. Over the space of 1 year, it can have up to 12 million birds either breeding, overwintering, or passing through. So if you're into birding and you want to see an amazing, spectacular sight, I would highly recommend going to the Wadden Sea in the Netherlands. There is a cousin of the bar-tailed godwit. It's a subspecies of bar-tailed godwit that breeds in Alaska and overwinters in Australia and New Zealand. So obviously we don't get this subspecies in Ireland, but it has the longest non-stop migration of any bird species. It's not the longest migration of any bird species, but the longest non-stop migration of any bird species. And it travels 10 to 11,000 kilometers from Alaska down to Australia and New Zealand non-stop. And like the red knot, it also self-cannibalizes. So it reduces its digestive organs and increases the size of its heart and its flight muscles just to make that epic journey. So these are a really incredible bird. I think they weigh about 300 grams. So like less than half a bag of sugar, and it can fly that kind of distance non-stop. It's amazing. Its cousin is the black-tailed godwit. So it breeds in Iceland, and the males are actually smaller than the females, which is really interesting. In Dublin Bay, it's usually found in the northern part of Bull Island and in Booterstown Strand, as it likes muddier habitat, and it feeds on playing pitches. So if you go up to any of the playing pitches alongside the Brent geese, you'll often see these black-tailed godwits. These species, the bar-tailed godwit and the black-tailed godwit, during the winter they look ridiculously similar until you get the eye in. So I just thought I'd give a quick breakdown of the difference between them. So the black-tailed godwit has quite a plain brown back and has really long legs. So between the knee joint here and where the leg meets the belly is really long. And this is in comparison to the black-tailed godwit, which has a short little stumpy bit in between the knee joint and the belly and a scalloped pattern on the back. With these two species, it's really all about getting the eye in, just getting out there and watching them, and I guarantee you'll get loads of enjoyment out of them because they're quite big characters as well. In flight, they're actually a lot easier to ID. So the bar-tailed godwit has quite a plain scalloped pattern on its back. Whereas the black-tailed godwit has this lovely white stripe on its wings and this wedge shape, black wedge shape on its tail, and this is where it gets its name from. And just above the tail, you can see this white rump. It's a really characteristic, really characteristic of black-tailed godwits in flight. So, if you're out and about in Dublin Bay and you want to see these species, first off, if you're looking for black-tailed godwits, which are represented by yellow, I would go to North Bull Island, particularly the northern part of North Bull Island, what's known as the North Lagoon, and they occur in quite big numbers there. Talca Estuary might get better views down here because it's closer to the wall, so you get quite a number of them feeding down here at low tide or on a falling tide. And you also, quite curiously, get them on Dollymount Strand just beside the Bull Wall there. So if you're walking along the Bull Wall just here and you look out with your binoculars, you'll be able to see them foraging in around there. On the south side of Dublin Bay, you'll get them down at Booterstown Marsh. So there's a nice mucky, marshy area that they like. So they really like muddy habitats. That's where their food, that's where the food that they prefer lives. If you're looking for bar-tailed godwits, go to the South Lagoon where Ricky is at the minute, and you'll see them foraging there at low tide and also roosting up in this salt marsh here. You'll get them on the far side of the Bull Wall there in the Talca Estuary. And the reason that they're here, and sorry, you'll get them in Dollymount Strand on the sandier mud flats and on Sandymount Strand. So bar-tailed godwits, unlike black-tailed godwits, like really sandy substrates. They like really sandy habitats. So that's why you get them on beaches like here and here, and in kind of slightly sandier habitats like here. Bull Island also, or not Bull Island rather, sorry, the Dublin Bay also has nationally important numbers of several species. So again, this just means that 1% or more of the population of these species in Ireland can be found at these sites in Dublin Bay. So first species we have up is the oyster catcher. So this is the oyster catcher here. And then we also have golden plover. So oyster catcher, unlike its name is actually a bit of a lie. Oyster catchers don't eat oysters. What they eat are mussels, cockles, worms, and clams. And the beak of an oyster catcher is shaped by the way it feeds. So hammers, like this guy, they feed on mussels, cockles, and have a shorter, blunter bill. Just from hammering it in, the bill gets worn out over time. And the other feeding type, so we have what's called probers, and they feed on worms and clams and have longer, pointier bills. So it's just a video of an oyster catcher feeding, and as you're watching it, just keep an eye on the bill. It's a really long, pointed bill, and I'll just play it for you now. So you can see the oyster catcher has a clam, and see his long pointed beak. So that beak is long and pointed because he's just sticking it into mud all the time. He's not having to hammer it against anything hard. And so his beak is able to stay like nice and long and pointed. Okay, so we've been colouring oyster catchers in Dublin Bay, and they get 3 colourings. And one of these has a unique code. So you can see this bird here is called IV, and this allows individual identification of the birds. The purpose of this is to understand the sites that these birds rely on, both in Ireland and abroad, and how long they live and where they're breeding. So this is really important if we're going to conserve these species. During the breeding season, we have found that there's really strong connections between oyster catchers that overwinter in Dublin Bay and breed up in Iceland and Scotland. So most of our observations of breeding oyster catchers have come from these 2 spots. And you can see a real Scottish English divide. So we only actually have 2 resightings of oyster catchers breeding in England. Most of them like to come from Scotland and Iceland. Sorry, yeah. Another species which occurs in nationally important numbers in Dublin Bay is this absolutely beautiful bird, the golden plover. So the golden plover breeds in Iceland, Scotland, and in the west and northwest of Ireland. We get summer visitors from France and Iberia. And in flight, this bird performs these beautiful starling-like murmurations. And I have a video now just to show you that. So the way that the birds are going to start circling now is an anti-predator defense. Essentially, if a peregrine falcon is chasing them, they can be swooping and diving, and it confuses the peregrine falcon and it mightn't be able to pick out one. Also, they occur in these really, really big numbers because the more of them there are, the less likely one of them is to get picked off. So if you're looking for golden plovers, the best places in Dublin Bay to see them are again North Bull Island, down here in the south again, the Talca Estuary, and down at Marion Gates you get big groups of them resting up at Marion Gates. So the redshank and the curlew also occur in nationally important numbers. So this is a redshank and this is a curlew. Okay, so the curlew breeds in Europe and Western Siberia. It's the largest wading bird in Europe. In Ireland, it is a breeding species in Ireland, but it has been in decline since the 1980s, and a lot of this is to do with intensification of agriculture. So currently we have 123 breeding pairs in Ireland. During the winter, we get a lot of curlew coming in from Europe. So you'll notice that you'll see a lot of curlew around Dublin Bay, but these aren't Irish breeding curlew. These aren't just curlew breeding in Ireland. These are also curlew that are breeding around Europe. And this species is found right across Dublin Bay. So redshank, these lovely little orange-legged guys here, they breed in Ireland, England, Scotland, and Iceland. And they're passage migrants from Scandinavia and the Baltic region. They're affectionately and sometimes not so affectionately called the warden of the marsh. Basically, these birds scare at the drop of a hat. And when they rise up, they start calling and they scare everything else up, which is an absolute pain when you're trying to count them. But they're great little birds, and they're basically the Duracell bunnies of the wading world. They never stop. They never stop moving. They always seem to be on the go. This species is found right across Dublin Bay. Anywhere you go in Dublin Bay, you should eventually see a redshank. Okay, moving on to our ducks and we have nationally important numbers of some of these as well. So in summer, all years, 1% or more of Ireland's population of widgeon, teal, and shelduck, so widgeon, teal, and shelduck, are in Dublin Bay, which is quite incredible. Okay, so shelduck breeds in Ireland. It's quite unusual because it breeds in holes in banks, in trees, and in rabbit burrows. So if you're out on Dalkey Island, which is part of the biosphere, there's shelduck that breed out there, and they go out down into the rabbit burrows and lay their eggs, raise their chicks, and then they'll swim across with them across the sound. So they'll swim across the sea and bring them over to dry land that way. Birds from Scandinavia and the Baltics overwinter in Ireland as well. So the population gets bolstered during the winter with those birds. Okay, so this is a widgeon, this is the male, and this is the female. So I should have said back here, both the male and female shelduck look exactly the same. And this probably has something to do with the fact that they are in like holes in trees or in rabbit burrows. They don't need to camouflage in. Whereas this species here, the widgeon, this girl here, she has to hide away from any potential predators. So if she can blend in with the rest of her environment, with the grass and stuff around her, then a predator such as a fox won't be able to detect the nest as easily. So widgeon that overwinter in Ireland breed in Iceland, and their diet consists of eelgrass, sea lettuce, and then they'll eat insects and mollusks during the summer. This is teal, so it's a tiny little duck. It's really cute. Male and female again look quite different. The female's quite plain, and again this is for the same reason. It's just so that the nest doesn't get detected. The birds again that overwinter in Ireland breed in Iceland, and they eat a lot of seeds, vegetation, and mollusks. So if you're looking for ducks in Dublin Bay, Bull Island is your spot. This is where you'll find it's Duck Central. Finally, we have the Dublin Port Tern Colony. Dublin Port Tern Colony is really fantastic. So there's around 600 breeding pairs on the island, there's around 600 breeding pairs in the Dublin Port Tern Colony, and they are all on man-made structures within the port. I'm just going to show you a quick video of what it's like to approach these colonies, and just note that we are approaching them and going onto them because we're working there. We minimize the amount of time that we're there, and we're very careful while we are on these colonies. what you would have heard there are mostly common terns. There's around 600 breeding pairs, but so there's around 600 breeding pairs of terns in Dublin Bay, and what you would have heard there are mostly common terns, but there are a small number of Arctic terns in the port as well that are breeding in the port. Okay, so this is the common tern. The common tern is quite a this is a common tern. So the common tern has a black and it has this orange bill with a black tip. It has short tail streamers. So I don't know if you can see it there, but the little white bits coming out, those are the tail streamers, and these are the wings. And it has long orange-red legs. So this species overwinters between Western and Southern Africa, and it breeds across Eurasia and North America. So it is a circumpolar breeding distribution, meaning basically it breeds all across, it breeds all the way around the globe, but on the northern side, the northern part. What's really lovely about the common tern's name is that it means sea swallow. So basically, common terns have this nickname, sea swallow, and it's because they have this really beautiful buoyant flight. But if you look at their Latin name, which is down here, if you look at their Latin name, it's Sterna hirundo, and Sterna means swallow or sand martin, house martin, and sorry, Sterna means Sterna hirundo, which basically means sea swallow. The second species that we have in Dublin Port is the Arctic tern. And the Arctic tern is one of the most beautiful birds, in my opinion. It has this dark red bill during the breeding season, and during the breeding season again, it has this black cap. It has greyish underparts and short legs, and has white tail streamers that extend beyond the wingtips. These short legs, when it's standing, they give it kind of a jumpier appearance than the common tern, which looks a little bit taller and up off the ground, whereas the Arctic tern looks just that little bit closer to the ground. Again, the Arctic tern breeds across most of Eurasia and North America, but it breeds much closer to, breeds much higher up in the Arctic Circle than the common tern can. Ireland is at the southern limit of the Arctic tern's breeding range, and it's considered much more site faithful than the common tern. So when the Arctic tern isn't with us here in Ireland, it's actually off wintering off the coast of Antarctica, which is absolutely incredible. Bird that weighs about 100 grams, and it makes the longest migration of any species in the world. The distance it migrates, just to put it into context, the distance it migrates over its lifetime is equivalent to 3 to 4 round trips to the moon, which is just nuts. So in Dublin Port, we've been ringing these birds over the last number of years. So again, it's just these little rings here. We just use one on the terns, one colour ring on the terns. And these colorings are throwing up some really interesting results. It's showing us that common terns, as it's proving that the common terns that are up here in Dublin Bay with us during the summer are overwintering off the coast of Western and Southwestern Africa, which is really lovely. And this is a photograph of a common tern during the winter that was photographed off the coast of Senegal. So this bird here, all the way from here to down around here. Okay, so there are, as I was saying before, there are a number of challenges that come with Dublin Bay's kind of proximity to a capital city and to Dublin Port. There are also benefits, as Ricky was pointing out. There's no hunting on the islands and the birds are safer from that kind of thing, but there are some challenges. So the port represents one of the challenges. It's really good for the terns in that it provides them with safe breeding, it provides them with breeding space. But also a port is a very, very busy place. You've got a lot of ships coming in and out, you've got a lot of noise pollution associated with that. And around these ships, there's a lot of birds, such as the terns, who are like diving into the sea and there's a ship just down the way from them, or other seabirds doing the same, or you have wading birds like these sanderling and gunnin here, who are foraging along the shore and boats are coming in along past them, or they're trying to rest up along the shore and being disturbed. So we don't know what kind of compromises birds are having to make on a day-to-day basis because of the activity in the port. To compound this, there's 1.5 million people sitting right on top of the bay. So all of the nature all of the wildlife in Dublin Bay is having to coexist with quite a lot of activity, and this leads to a lot of disturbances in the bay. And when we think of disturbances, when we see like a dog or a person disturbing birds, typically our attitudes are, they're birds, they can fly somewhere else, but they can, but they're still ecologically tied. They're still tied to that place. And also every time they have to get up and move, it wastes energy. It uses up energy that they should have been using for feeding or for roosting. So it's really important basically just to keep our distance from these birds. And just, there's been some challenges. There's been kind of a few losses that have come from disturbance. So on North Bull Island, there used to be a population of hares on the island, and these have now gone extinct. We've also lost the little tern colony from North Bull Island as well. So it used to be up at the northern tip of the island. And because of disturbance, again, they just couldn't successfully raise any young. And the grey seal population on Bull Island, again, is considered under threat because of disturbances, particularly from dogs. So these are just some of the impacts that kind of being in an urban environment has had on wildlife in the bay. So dogs off lead is kind of one of the leading causes, is actually the leading cause of disturbance in the bay, and one that needs to be monitored. So this is just a quick video of two actually really lovely dogs, but and they're just running through, but they're running through a flock. So basically the take-home message from today is, if we just give wildlife a little bit of space, just keep our distance from a bit, we'll give it a chance to flourish. We are so lucky to have this incredible ecosystem right on our doorstep, but we do need to protect it for future generations, and we can do that by essentially just keeping our distance from birds, from the wild, and not just birds, the wildlife that is in the bay, and giving it space. And that's it. So thank you very much for listening, and any questions? And I'll stop sharing now.
Tara, thank you so much. I've been looking at the chat, and there's been a huge number of positive comments. Such an informative presentation. You know, a lot of people have taken an awful lot away from this, and I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to share that again. You know, through social media channels. That was one of our questions. Is this going to be available? And absolutely, yes, it will. We'll be posting this up and sharing where that can be found via our social media channels. Now, there's Ricky again. Yeah. He looks like he's enjoying himself an awful lot, far too much. Now, unfortunately, I lost connection halfway through and had to relog, so it was all fun for me. But we're going to try and answer a few of the questions now. I'm going to go straight to a question here from Gavin Rothwell, and it covers the last point, Tara, that you were talking about, and it's about that disturbance. So Gavin, you say, thanks for organising this. My question, is this being done to protect Bull Island from further, what is being done to protect Bull Island from further serious biodiversity decline? In the last few years, the island has lost some key breeding species, including the hare, little tern and ring plover, etc., all due to habitat disturbance. It's a really tricky one, and obviously it's a known problem. We're managing biospheres that people can enjoy them, that they can get out there and they can connect with nature. But obviously we have to manage it so that we're protecting that habitat. And certainly disturbance is an issue, and the dogs is a particularly big one. There has been studies on North Bull Island in particular, but as far as I'm concerned, I'm looking at the whole of the biosphere, but I'm going to focus on North Bull Island because that's what you're referencing here. There have been studies on North Bull Island to look at the issue and maybe what we can do to manage and protect it. So one of the studies that was conducted by EcoAiron came back with a number of approaches, and one was to just a zoning approach. So the idea would be to have no access to the very northern part where the seals are, and certainly some of the more important bird species. That dogs should be on leash in the dunes, but to have an area where dogs can be allowed to be off leash, and that would be the southern end of North Bull Island. Now, this is kind of a compromise. It's not ideal, but it's certainly would be considered by most to be a step in the right direction. And we know that people who own dogs are generally, not always, but are generally dog lovers. So it's getting that message out there, and getting people to realise that, you know, when the red setters start chasing after birds, it's not having a game, it's actually quite serious in that instance. So we've got work to do, and we have plans to target this particular issue. I mean, this webinar is part of that process, but we are looking at producing a short video that will highlight the issues and explain in simple terms to the community how we can better engage with our local wildlife. There's talk of having improved signage on North Bell Island to raise awareness of that, and if the visitor centre happens, which I'm sure it will, hopefully it will, there'll be an opportunity to engage with the public in a more meaningful way to get over those messages. So it's happening, and I know it's not happening fast enough for some people, but it's in hand, and I hope that kind of answers your question to some degree. And if it doesn't, please come back to me, and you know, we can have a discussion on that. Now, there's a load of other questions that have come through.
There is a load, Gina. Just one that sort of follows up on what you were just talking about there. Right. Is Kyle has asked, is there a recommended safe distance for observing or times of the year to give birds more space, that maybe it's better at a certain time of year to be watching them and then leave them in peace at other times?
Ricky, maybe you could answer that one. How far are you away?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a sort of prescribed distance. Depends on the situation, depends on the species. Some will tolerate everything. There's a deeply sort of ingrained, I suppose, genetic response for animals to, or you know, birds to flee from dogs. So they will scare from dogs much easier than they will from humans. And again, it depends where you are. So you see all along the sea wall, along Clontarf and stuff, the birds will happily feed below, and you can literally be a foot away from them in distance, but maybe 10 foot above them or whatever, and they'll just go about their business. So really, there is no, you kind of have to gauge it yourself. The closer you want to get, you only need to get as close as you need to get. And we would say never go on any of the vulnerable habitats anyway. So if you can do it from the road or from the sort of allocated VPs, the viewpoints and stuff, that's the way to do it, you know. You know, you can really, I mean, I didn't demonstrate it well today, but the spectacle when the low tide is here and you're on the bridge here or anywhere on the road here in Bull Island, you can see 10, 15, 20,000 water birds swirling around and in their flocks and stuff. You really don't need to go any closer. The spectacle is brilliant. But the short answer is no. There's no kind of 5 meters, 10 meters, 20 meters.
Thanks, Ricky. Just to follow up on that there, while we have you, is there a difference? You just mentioned the tide and the flats. Someone has asked, is there a difference viewing the flats while the tide is rising versus when it's falling? When's the best time to get out there to see the birds?
Yeah, falling is probably more relaxed because the birds, like for example now, the birds are all squished up, roosting up onto the salt marsh, and they're getting some shut-eye before they can feed again when the tide drops. So they'll be nice and relaxed when they're becoming feed because they're not chasing the tide, they're following a dropping tide, so there's no big rush. So I suppose a falling tide is quite a good time if you can catch it in the middle of the day where you've plenty of light and the light's not fading on you. But if it's sort of coming to late evening and it's a rising tide, you're rushing against the clock, you know. So try time it that way, that low tide is in the middle of the day, and you'll have plenty of opportunity then. I think is a good chance.
Which is why we had the presentation at this time today. So,
yeah,
so you can be out there in capturing that element. Fantastic. There's a question there from Elizabeth. We missed the total population of Brent geese in and around Dublin Bay. The Isle of Man has up to 110 in a small bay. How many did we have? Do you know those numbers?
I don't know them offhand, but I can find them. So if that's any good.
I can probably,
sorry, go on, Helen.
You're all right. Can you hear me there?
Yeah.
I can probably answer that one. There's about, in and around, I don't know the definite figure, of course, but in Ireland there's in and around 40,000 of the population of light-bellied brent geese that breed in the northeast Canadian Arctic. So that's the population that come to Ireland. And as Tara said earlier, it's almost the entire number of individuals from that population that come to Ireland. So about 40,000 all around the coast. But in Dublin, obviously, we have Dublin Bay, we've Baldoyle Bay, we've Rogerstown Estuary, we've Broadmeadow. There's loads of food for them, loads of opportunities for them, but it's hard to put a handle on exactly how many. When we do our censuses, we do dawn censuses so that we can make sure that we're counting the birds before they leave the bay. So we're getting them just when they're kind of coming to in the morning before they've had a chance to leave, if they're choosing to leave to go and forage inland. And we often get in the region of about 5,000 geese in Dublin Bay. But then, of course, there's Baldoyle Bay, which really, on the face of it, when you look at a map, it's only a few hundred meters really skip over, over Howth into Baldoyle Bay, and there could be another couple of thousand roosting there, and they do move around a bit. So it's hard to put an exact figure on the birds in Dublin Bay, but all I can say is that we count in the region of about 5,000, but across the few estuaries in Dublin, there could be 15,000 geese. I'm sure some of the folk from the Irish Brent Goose Research Group might have even more detailed information on that. They've done some great work with GPS devices looking at foraging areas and so on. But yeah, Dublin is a critical area for that population of the Canadian pale-bellied Brent.
Thank you, Helen. Appreciate that.
Just to add to that, and sort of linking the two biospheres, the two Irish ones, the Strangford Lough is where the Brent sort of arrive first, and are really well studied there, and then they move sort of slowly south along the east coast and down. So we'd see them in Dublin before you'd see them in any numbers down in Kerry, but certainly to get them in Kerry in good numbers too, sort of a couple of weeks later maybe. So there's always great excitement when they arrive, and tweets and various texts going around when the first flocks begin to arrive. So it's good. And yeah,
Ricky, just on that, I just want to, there was a message in the chat there with Anna Rogers, who's listening in, and Anna's doing some research for a film that's going to be covering the Brent geese, and it's aimed at young people, primarily 7 to 11-ish year olds, and the film's going to be called Where the Wild Geese Go, and she's actually in Dublin Bay at the moment, capturing information, taking interviews and whatnot else. So that'll be really interesting to really learn a little bit more, and they'll actually be following them from the high Arctic to Dublin and back again. So that's fascinating. Now, Marion Harris has just said, please say hello to the Bidens, of course, and they're very welcome back in Ireland, and we'd love to see them back in Mayo, and actually we'd love to see a biosphere in Mayo, but that's for another day. So Marion, and Marion has actually also pointed out that Dublin Bay isn't the only capital city with a biosphere in Europe. So have to say that we'd like to be unique, but we're not quite. But we are quite rare, and obviously very special. So thanks very much for that, Marion Harris. Next question. How do you catch the birds to mark them? Who wants to take that? How do you catch them?
Any of us could probably take that one, but there was a video in an earlier presentation that must have got dropped out, but there's a couple of techniques, but the best, most effective and safest version is a thing called cannon netting. And it's quite an ominous name, but it does involve shooting a net from a pair of cannons over a flock of roosting birds. And you might find footage online, but it's all done under license, and there's very few people that actually have the experience and the skills to operate cannon nets. So we actually rely on a very small group of guys to do that. So every couple of years, we round up the troops, we get the tags, we get everything we need, and we from our studies and from the loads of recce's, we find a nice spot to do it, a suitable tide, suitable weather, and everything, and we set up and hopefully catch some birds. And I suppose 8 times out of 10 you don't catch anything, and because the tide or the birds or the flocks go against you. And really the size of the net, even though it's huge, it's like a postal stamp when you put it out on the salt marsh. So that's how you do it. And once you have the net over the birds, you then cover it up to keep them calm. You extract them one by one, and you keep them in a thing called a cloche, which is a little fabric kind of fabric sort of tents almost, and you process them then one by one. You put on their little rings and get the measurements and the biometrics you need and release them, and it's all done very safe and scientifically. It's that's how it's done. So anyone that's interested, they Google that and you'll find some footage.
Well, Ricky, we can go one better. We've actually got some footage on our website and on our Facebook page with a short video taken of just that with Brent Geese in Dublin Bay. And it shows the Canon net, and it shows the tagging, and it shows the release. So yeah, it's fascinating how it's done. I was imagining the old cartoons Catch the Pigeon back in the day, but you know, that's kind of my age. Good stuff. Now we're moving on. So Deirdre, I missed the beginning of the presentation due to work, but are there guillemots on the South Bull wall, and do they go into the old foghorns of the Poolbeg Lighthouse?
Yes, well, there's black guillemots. Well, you'll see guillemots and black guillemots around the Great South Wall. Certainly, if you're walking the wall, looking on the Liffey side of it, you'll frequently see them diving in the water, and you'll very frequently also see, particularly close to the summertime and during summer, black guillemots on the wall itself. And yes, I have seen them flying into. I'm not sure if it's the same exact hole that we're talking about here, the foghorn, but certainly on the Red Lighthouse at the end of the Great South Wall, I have seen black guillemots flying in there for sure. Yeah.
Okay, very good. So the next question is from Marion Harris. So Marion said, BirdWatch Ireland are doing the first comprehensive survey of ground nesting birds at North Bull Island 2020-2021 for Dublin City Council. We applied successfully for funding under the National Biodiversity Action Plan. So it's not a question, but it's just a statement. So there's a comprehensive survey being done on ground nesting birds there at North Bull Island. So that's good to know. So that one's been done. Biden's. A question here we've already had, which was, what's your favourite bird? I think we covered that earlier. Helen, you didn't answer. Did you have your own favourite bird there?
My own favourite bird?
Yeah.
My own favourite bird, I have to say, I always jump straight to sanderling. It's one of the ones I think Tara showed in the presentation there with that the dogs were disturbing, but they're such beautiful birds, and if anyone wants to go and have a look at them, they're always on the tide line, so you'll see them just skipping, as Tara said earlier, skipping in and out of the waves there. The waves are kind of churning up invertebrates and so on in the sand, but they're like little clockwork mice, and they're very, very pale in colour, and they're absolutely beautiful little birds. So Dollymount Strand or the tide line along Sandymount as well, but actually at high tide, a really good place to see them, and people walk by them all the time and don't even notice them, is when you're walking the Great South Wall at a high tide, when all of the sand flats are covered and they now have nowhere to feed. They roost in flocks along the rock armament of the Great South Wall itself. So they could be literally 1 foot away from walkers and joggers on the wall, and people just don't think to look onto the rocks. So that's a good tip at high tide during the winter, to look out for sanderling. They're really white in colour, and they're gorgeous little waders. Fantastic.
That answers the next question from Emma Shannon as well, which was, what's your favourite place to watch birds? So fantastic. In Kerry, Eleanor, is there a really good place to watch birds in Kerry? You're muted.
I'm mute. Down in Kerry, well, I'm really lucky. I actually live just outside the biosphere area, very close to Derrynane National Park, and we have amazing sand dunes and sand mud flats here as well. So that's where I'd go to watch birds, and it's within my 5K, which is fantastic. So I've been totally spoiled.
Fantastic. Very good. So this is a strange one from Shane O'Doherty, who runs Shane's Hope Adventures and is a great supporter of the Dublin Bay Biosphere, one of our adventure tourism operators. So his question is, do the porpoise follow the gannet, or does the gannet follow the porpoise? Come on. There's a few laughs going on in Ricky's car there.
That's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Chicken or the egg, is it? Yeah.
I think Shane is just being funny, but I reckon it probably, I think they'd probably swap sometimes. I think the porpoise would be quite happy if the gannet indicated where the fishball was, or vice versa. So maybe we'll throw it back at Shane to find out for our next webinar. We'll put the pressure on him to. find out for
I
sure.
know when we're out, if we're ever out trying to find porpoise or dolphins or anything like that out in a bay anywhere, we always look for the birds first. So for humans, it's easier to spot the birds first and follow them to where they're feeding, and you're likely to see the porpoise or dolphins in that area then.
So now this is going to be going to you guys again, BirdWatch Ireland. Are rats still a predatory problem for birds breeding sites in the port area?
Yes. Tara definitely knows an awful lot about this. She's done a lot of glamorous work with rats. So Tara, do step in if I'm getting anything wrong here. But yeah, in the summertime with our work with BirdWatch Ireland and the Dublin Bay Birds Project, we monitor the tern colonies in Dublin Port. So there's 4 different man-made platforms that the birds nest on. And every year we find evidence that rats have managed to get out to these platforms. Rats are very good swimmers. So I didn't realize how good. I thought they might just be able to cover, you know, a few feet or a few meters, but it turns out they can cover quite a distance. So we're lucky enough that they haven't made it out to, there's a platform that the terns nest on. It's a pontoon the Dublin Port Company arranged and deployed out there and look after. And it's fantastic because it now has, I think maybe, I can't think now the final figure, but about 250 pairs of common terns nesting on it in the summer just gone. But thankfully, even though that's quite close, well, it's about 150 meters from the Great South Wall, where I presume there probably are lots of rats lurking underneath the rock armament. But so far they haven't made it out to that pontoon, which we're delighted about. But there is the other, I think the rats have definitely made it out to all of the other structures that they nest on. So it is a problem, and it's a hard one to solve. It's something that we're always talking about. There's different things you can do, like putting kind of baffles on the chains that are holding the platforms down to prevent the rats from climbing up, and things like making the chains slippy. But rats seem to, they're excellent at finding ways around these things, but certainly it's something that we're trying really hard to prevent, because once they get onto a platform, they just kind of go hell for leather with the chicks and eggs and so on. So it is a problem.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. So we started with eight or nine questions when we finished the presentation. We're now up to 22. So we're going to try and get through them. So this is an interesting one. Do shags dry their feathers the same way as cormorants do? Ricky's coming in.
Yeah, nice short answer, yes.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, I like the short answers. So we've got what are the merits, if any, of making a bridge break in the Bull Island Causeway to permit tidal flow? Would you know? I don't know the answer.
Yeah, not sure I understand the question. There was the causeway. So when I was sharing my screen earlier, probably show you now. So way out there in the distance, I don't know if you can see the chevron. That's the causeway up there. So it marks the sort of halfway point between the wooden bridge and what we call South Lagoon is between the causeway and this bridge, and then there's another lagoon, North Lagoon, as Tara described, between there and Sutton, should we say, or Howth, sort of head where that starts. There was back in the day it was breached. It was designed for the tide to flow through it, and it just silted up over time, and it was grand. So the tide just escaped either end of the island, so it was left that way. It was never corrected, and it seems to work fine, and the habitats haven't suffered or anything. So I think everyone's happy to leave it that way. So I don't know if the person asking the question knows more than that, or has reason to believe that isn't the case. But certainly from a bird's point of view, it hasn't been on our radar that it is a problem in any way.
Great. Okay, thanks very much for that. What is the trend in Brent geese numbers? There seem fewer this year, is what's been suggested, but from what I'm aware, over the last number of years, Brent geese numbers have actually increased slightly. But would you have good stats?
Yeah, I think generally Brent are one of the success stories. There are species that come from the west, the northeast Canadian Arctic, but west of Ireland, and some of the species coming from that area northwest of Ireland seem to be doing better than some of the ones coming from the east, for reasons some that are known and some that are unknown. But the brent themselves generally have been on a sort of increasing trend. There's years when they maybe have a poor breeding year and then things might level out and so on. I don't know huge detail from year to year maybe of the international population, but overall, since, you know, over the last kind of 10-20 years, it's been an increasing trend. And when people say they haven't seen as many, I presume it's probably someone in Dublin, is it saying that? I wouldn't say there's fewer in Dublin now. I think they spread out a lot, and sometimes we can do a count in a bay one month and we might find 5,000 brent geese, and then the following month, even though it's midwinter when you would expect to see peak numbers, we might only count 200 or 300. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not there. It just means that they could be inland feeding on some of the parks and playing pitches, which is something that they do regularly. So it's quite hard to get a handle on the numbers at any one time. But overall, an increasing trend. Yeah.
Joe there from the Isle of Man, they're already thinking about the next webinar series, by the way. So if anyone has any ideas, no, I think it's going to be Eleanor, you're going to be next in the Kerry Biosphere for next month, and the Isle of Man the month after. But if anyone has any ideas, what you'd like to know and learn about the Biosphere, that's really good. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you and take those ideas on board. So another question here from Bernard. What about the broad meadows between Swords and Malahide? How significant is it for bird species? Would you know?
Broadmeadow or Malahide Estuary, with the train line running across it there, kind of separating the inner from the outer. It has internationally important numbers of several waterbird species. I'm straining now to think of exactly all the detail, but certainly black-tailed godwits. It's a site where large flocks of golden plover are frequently recorded. So it's a very important site. Yeah, I think all of the Dublin estuaries, actually, including Rogerstown, Baldoyle, Dublin Bay, they're all really, really important for wintering waterbirds.
Great, thank you for that. So this is an interesting question. So oyster catchers are seen flocking on football pitches. Would they be feeding on earthworms? What are they after on the football pitches?
Yeah, they should be feeding on earthworms out there. So you'll see them feeding alongside curlew as well, and the black-tailed godwit and the brent geese. So the brent are looking for grass, but the rest of them are looking for earthworms and other kind of insects and invertebrates.
Fantastic. Nice, quick, easy one. So we've Councillor Cooney here. What is the best way to protect the nesting ground birds on Bull Island and getting the new management plan quickly written and enacted? So the Bull Island management plan is ready to go, and I believe there's some sort of consultation process that's happening. But what is the best way to protect the ground nesting birds? What are your thoughts, guys?
The best way is to cut all access to the island, but that's not going to happen. And so, I mean, that horse has bolted, and obviously it's so important for recreation and all that sort of stuff. So zoning is a very good middle ground, maybe. It's a good suggestion. I don't know. I mean, can't say it has to be discussed, but really, if you could restrict access or stop the disturbance and take all the predators out of the situation, you'd have a perfect situation. But that's just not possible in the modern climate. It's just not. But that is the answer.
Yeah. I mean, biospheres are managed for people and nature, and by having that connection, as we found this year in particular, people appreciate nature more. There's having that connection. So there are benefits to it, and I think the zoning option that has been already discussed would make the most sense, and really raising the awareness of what issues are caused by the disturbance, because like I say, most of our dog owners are animal lovers, so we just need to get the message out there and hopefully get the right response. So where can Renata find the ringed plover in Dublin Bay?
So you get ringed plover down on North Bull Island there where Ricky is. You also get them down on Sandymount Strand. So down around Marion Gates, it's in between Booterstown Marsh and it's down around Booterstown train station down around there. You get them there as well. And you'll also get them on the beach the odd time on Dollymount Strand. They'd be easier to see on Dollymount Strand than Sandymount Strand, because Dollymount Strand is a lot thinner than Sandymount Strand. Sandymount Strand is like this huge sand flat, and the tide line is so far away, and that's where the ring plover would be up at the tide line, along with all the sanderling that Helen was mentioning and Dunlin and stuff. So yeah, I'd say Dollymount Strand, North Bull Island, the South Lagoon down near the wooden bridge where Ricky was, and down Marion Gates on Sandymount Strand, but it's kind of where there's a grassy area down there. You'll find them. Okay.
I'll add a caveat though, not the easiest species to connect with, definitely not, of all the things we've mentioned. It's one of the trickier ones.
Okay, so Kyle's asking a question here. Does the urban environment have more positive or negative effect compared to estuaries with less urban influence? Eleanor, did you want to? No. Any ideas?
Again, I could only give an opinion. I think that insulation the capital city gives it from certain predators and activities and stuff is probably quite a useful thing. But equally, measure that against the pressures that it creates, it's, I don't know, on balance, I think it's probably negative.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be difficult to say, but yeah. Well, no, I don't think it's that, but it's probably negative overall.
Tim's question is it illegal to photograph nesting birds without a special license?
Yeah, that's an easy one. Yeah, it's illegal. Yeah, totally. And yeah, no, it is. You need a license.
Very good. So when the Brents and Godwits moved to Parkland, did they continue to feed on grasses?
So the Brent are feeding on grasses, but the Godwits, they're feeding, and it's a black-tailed Godwit specifically, it's feeding on the worms.
The worms.
Yeah, and other
fantastic. Okay, good stuff. Now we're running out of time. See if we can get through a few quick ones here. Has there been any noticeable drop in the population with the development of Baldoyle Racecourse and all the green belts surrounding the estuary? That's not a quick one, is it?
A noticeable drop in what, sorry?
Bird populations, I would imagine.
In relation to the development around that Baldoyle?
Yeah.
No idea. Quick answer, hard one to monitor. So I wouldn't, that's something you'd have to do a very specific study on. Yeah, so no, I wouldn't have an answer for that.
Okay. So where are we going? How long does the eelgrass feast last for the Brent before they have to move off to playing fields? That's a really good question. So they have their feast, and when that's gone, how long is it before that's gone?
Yeah, there's no specific answer. Probably depends on the size of the flock that arrives into Dublin and how long it takes them to find the beds and just to forage on it. So it's gone when it's gone, really. And then they just head off inland, like you say. So it depends.
Now, unfortunately, we've run out of time. Look, I mean, the number of questions and the interesting questions has just proved what a fascinating, interesting subject this is. Now, if you have any other questions that are absolutely burning, maybe you could direct them to myself at info@dublinbaybiosphere.ie, or to the guys there at BirdWatch Ireland. I'm sure you have a general email. Would you have a general email that people can contact you at?
Yeah, sure. You can send anything to info@birdwatchireland.ie.
Fantastic.
Or to any one of our email addresses, or Whelan for Ricky, H. Boland for me, and T. Adcock for Tara. And Dean, just to say thanks so much for inviting us to do this webinar on behalf of myself and Tara and Ricky. It's really nice and really heartening to see so many people participating and logging in and watching it, to see such good interest in birds. It's really lovely. So thank you.
There really is. Listen, thank you. I'm just going to share screen because I just want to highlight this is part of a Try Biosphere webinar series. There are going to be more biospheres, and we are going to be sharing details of forthcoming biospheres on social media. It's important to thank the Isle of Man Biosphere, the Kerry Biospheres for their support in this and their efforts to put the next set of Biosphere webinars are on. The Department of Culture, Heritage and Gaeltacht and the MPWS in particular for their support, Dublin Port for the support of BirdWatch Ireland. BirdWatch Ireland are way above and beyond, thank you so much. And then obviously the other participants in the Dublin Bay Biosphere Partnership, Dublin City Council, Dún Laoghaire, and County Council, Fingal County Council, and Fáilte Ireland. Guys, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found it as informative as I have done, and I can't wait for the next one. And hopefully you'll join us then. So thank you so much, and thank you BirdWatch Ireland for such a fantastic presentation. Thank you so much.